Mineral metabolism, again, a very important topic. I'm just going to be focusing on two very important minerals. Now, what are minerals? They happen to be elements which are present in natural foods. They're required in our diet in very small quantities. Because they're required in small quantities, we normally refer to them as micronutrients, and they act as cofactors for several biochemical reactions. They're essential for metabolism, growth, and maintenance of the living organism. They can be classified as being macrominerals and microminerals. Macrominerals are those whose RDA is more than 100 milligram per day. And so you have sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, etc., which are macrominerals. The microminerals are also called as the trace elements. So fluoride, iron, copper, zinc, etc., are called as the microminerals. Let's quickly run through calcium. So calcium and fluoride happen to be the two most important minerals from a dental perspective. So I'm going to be focusing on these two. Now, calcium happens to be the most abundant of all minerals in the body, and 99% of it is present in the bones and the teeth. Milk and milk products happen to be extremely good sources. Amongst the cereals you have the finger millet or ragi, which is also called as natsni or nagli. It happens to be a very good source of calcium. So this is a picture that shows you some of the good sources or rich sources of calcium. Now, calcium has very important functions in the body. I would suggest remember each topic of physiology, and you will find that in every topic you will find one function of calcium. So calcium is needed for the development of bones and teeth. It is required for the process of muscle contraction. It is needed for the process of blood coagulation. It is needed for the transmission of nerve impulses. It maintains membrane integrity and involved in cell membrane permeability. It is needed for the activation of several enzymes, needed for the secretion of certain hormones and neurotransmitters. It acts as a secondary messenger. It is involved in the secretory process, and it also has an important role on the heart. It prolongs the systole. Now, what is the RDA? Adult men and women require about 800 milligrams per day. During pregnancy and lactation, and postmenopausal women require about 1,500 milligrams per day. Children below the between 1 to 18 years require about 800 to 1,200 milligrams. The normal serum levels or the plasma concentration of calcium is between 9 to 11 milligram percent. Let's first look at some of the factors that promote the absorption. This actually, Shinde sir also mentioned it, and you would have also studied this in endocrinology. So calcitriol, or the active form of vitamin D, it promotes calcium absorption. Parathyroid hormone again is responsible for absorption of calcium. Low pH or acidic pH promotes it. Lactose, as well as the basic amino acids arginine and lysine, also promote the absorption of calcium. Now, calcium absorption is inhibited by phytates and oxalates present in the diet, mainly from the vegetarian diet. High concentration of phosphate in the diet can inhibit calcium uptake. Free fatty acids, high pH, and high content of dietary fiber can also ruin the chances of calcium being absorbed properly. Now, the regulation of serum calcium level, again, the LAQ that has been asked, usually they ask you for the RDA, the sources, the functions, the factors affecting, and the regulation of the serum calcium level. So since this has been discussed by Dr. Shinde, I'll be just very briefly going through this. So you've got parathyroid hormone, vitamin D, the active form calcitriol or 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol. Both of these, they help to increase the serum calcium level, whereas calcitonin has got an antagonistic action. It helps to decrease the serum calcium level. This is a diagram that shows whenever there is a fall in the serum calcium level, the parathyroid gland is stimulated. This results in release of the parathyroid hormone. This parathyroid hormone is responsible for the conversion of 25 hydroxycholecalciferol to 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, or the calcitriol, that's the active form of vitamin D. Now, once vitamin D is formed, it's got a three-pronged action. Its action on the intestine is to promote the synthesis of calcium binding protein, which will result in increased absorption of calcium. In the bones, it causes resorption of the bone, as a result of which calcium from the bone is put back into the blood, and in the kidney, it decreases the excretion, or rather we should say that it increases the reabsorption of calcium. So the absorption of calcium from the intestine, resorption of the bone, and reabsorption of calcium from the kidneys. As a result of all of this, there would be an increase in the serum calcium level, and parathyroid hormone would be switched off, and these processes would be reversed. So parathyroid hormone is involved in the long-term regulation of the serum calcium level. Calcitonin has got an exactly opposite action. Okay, so and this is involved more in the short-term regulation of serum calcium level. This inhibits osteoclastic activity and helps in the mineralization of the bone. So it inhibits the mobilization of calcium from the bone. And in the kidney, more excretion of calcium and phosphate occurs, and therefore there is a decrease in the blood calcium level. Hypocalcemia and hypercalcemia, these are two conditions, clinical conditions. These are related to the alterations in the blood calcium level. Hypocalcemia, hypoparathyroidism, vitamin D deficiency, or kidney disease can result in hypocalcemia, while one of the major causes of hypercalcemia happens to be hyperparathyroidism. Let's move on to the next very important element, that is fluoride or fluorine. Okay, so fluorine or fluoride is considered to be one very, very important element. And this is because of its very well-known effect in prevention of dental caries. It's also involved in the maintenance of the normal structure of the teeth and bones and also of the whole skeleton. So basically, we can say that fluoride plays an important role in the overall growth and general development. The main source of fluoride happens to be drinking water. कितना फ्लोराइड चाहिए अपने को, बहुत कम लगता है, 1 to 2 ppm. What is this ppm? It stands for parts per million. So very little concentration of fluoride is needed in our diet, and in certain areas fluoridation is done or fluoridated toothpastes are used. So whenever fluoridation of water is done or fluoridated toothpaste are used, it's very important to check how much of fluoride is present in the drinking water. And fluoride can be very readily absorbed from the intestine, and it's excreted in the urine, sweat, and stool. Okay. Now, these are some of the sources of fluoride in the diet which can provide us with a large amount. So seafood or seaweeds, they happen to be extremely good sources of fluoride. Now, what exactly does this fluoride do? So fluoride increases the resistance of the enamel to the acid attacks. So we studied in glycolysis that fluoride happens to be an inhibitor of enolase. So when enolase is inhibited, what is the end product of glycolysis? Under aerobic conditions, you get pyruvic acid. Under anaerobic conditions, you're getting lactic acid. So both of them are basically acids in nature. These acids, once they are formed, they're likely to erode the enamel and the dentine, and your tooth become more susceptible to the carious attack of the bacteria. So fluoride basically inhibits these bacterial enzymes and prevents the acid from being formed. It also combines with the calcium and phosphate. Calcium and phosphate come together to form something called as hydroxyapatite. Fluoride adds to the strength of the hydroxyapatite by forming fluorapatite. And together, they make the tooth resistant to bacterial or the attack by the bacterial enzymes. That doesn't mean that if you have fluoride or there is fluoride application, you can eat and you need not care about dental hygiene. So this diagram, as it shows that here the teeth which do not have sufficient amount of fluoride, they are susceptible to the action of the bacteria, and therefore this can result in caries. Whereas in the presence of fluoride, this acts as a protector. It's the knight in shining armor, which can simply drive away the bacteria which are going to cause damage to the tooth surface. Okay. Now, people living in localities where the drinking water contains less than 0.5 ppm of fluoride are more prone to develop dental caries. Especially in the younger ages, between 1 to 8 years of age, the presence of sufficient amount of fluoride is extremely important. And if fluoride is absent, as I said earlier, dissolution of the enamel and the dentine takes place, and pulp is exposed. There are inflammatory changes which can lead to a toothache. How can this be treated? By simply ensuring that sufficient amount of fluoride is added to the drinking water. But we should also be cautious and careful, because if there is too much of fluoride, it can also be dangerous and much more dangerous than dental caries. This is also a public health concern. In many areas of India and some parts of the world, you find that there is a large amount of fluoride in drinking water. So you find, especially in India, in Punjab, Rajasthan, some parts of Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, drinking water contains a large amount of fluoride. And this excess fluoride in the diet can manifest itself in the form of either dental fluorosis or skeletal fluorosis. Now, what happens in dental fluorosis? When the fluoride in the diet is more than 2 ppm, it causes chronic intestinal upset. It can cause gastroenteritis, loss of appetite, and weight loss. And when the amount of fluoride in the diet increases to more than 5 ppm, there is mottling of the enamel and discoloration of the tooth. And this should be a warning sign for the dentist, which means that there is constant toxicity of fluoride. Immediately, defluoridation in that area should be undertaken. You can never have one person who's suffering from excess amount of fluoride. It will be a public health concern that whole area would be having excess amount of fluoride. And if proper steps are taken by defluoridation, the next step can be avoided, that is skeletal fluorosis. So when the amount of fluoride in the diet exceeds 20 ppm or more, it can cause severe structure abnormalities in the bones, and it can cause a debilitating bone disease. So there's calcification of the soft tissues, ankylosing. There are changes in the mineralization of the bones. The long bones become heavy, leading to a very crippled kind of appearance. The person develops knock knees, which is also called as genu valgum, and there is also permanent physical disability, which is called as kyphosis. Okay, many a time what happens is a diagnosis is hampered because many other bone and joint diseases may also show similar symptoms. So therefore, so people or the doctors are not, they don't recognize this as being a cause of excess fluoride in the diet. So appropriate measures should be taken. I could just take out these two photographs online. These are the children with suffering from dental fluorosis. So as you can see, stained teeth, mottling of the enamel. So these are characteristic yellow-brown patches that indicate a dental fluorosis, whereas here you find the abnormalities, so knock knees and other deformative debilitating changes that can render a person crippled for life. This is because of skeletal fluorosis. So with this, I think I come to the end of my presentation. That doesn't mean that these are the only topics. There are many other important topics that are left. I request all of you to go through the previous